I'm Jose Ignacio Castañeda. I'm a reporter here with Spotlight Delaware, and we'll be talking a little bit more about what folks could take away from today. You know, when you go back home and you think about what can I do and what can I take away from what I heard today, you know, a little bit more of that individual community action that could be done amidst this changing landscape. So with that said, and with our previous panel, I just wanted to kind of start off with a question for our panelists a little bit about how an individual person's role has changed over the years in terms of, you know, maybe in years past, amid climate change, it was more like, you know, maybe the government, the federal government, the state government, the city government might, you know, step in. It's kind of their responsibility. How has an individual's kind of role and responsibility changed over the years? And what has your organization done to adapt to that?
I'll jump in. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic because it very much gets to the heart of the Bays to Backyards community engagement program that we're partnering with many individuals on. Individual action is essential to this, right? We're all part of this system, so it takes all of us in many respects. So what we are doing is piloting the Bays to Backyards community engagement program, which is set up as a recognition program for residential communities. And at its essence is empowering individuals to take meaningful action, not only to protect the bays, but really uplift or enhance our collective coastal resilience. In the face of such persistent and very large-scale threats, namely, of course, a changing climate and rapidly developing landscape. This program provides expert guidance and clarity to residential communities to implement very responsible practices in their own backyards. So this is very much tailored to individual communities. So they would be implementing environmentally responsible practices from a suite or a menu of actions that we put together in what we're calling like a framework. And then they get credit. They earn points for this to work up to a bay-friendly community status. So this is really at the heart of the empowerment right here. And the fact that with the ever-growing communities that we see in this area, it's really gonna take all of us. I think, you know, if you were to step back, at its core, this is a locally rooted, community-driven program that brings with it expert guidance, support, and structure to give that clear path, all while celebrating our connections with nature, starting right in our own backyard. So I'm really pleased that you asked that question right off the bat, because that's truly what it's all about, providing that individual empowerment right here.
Thank you. So at Energize Delaware, we really want to reach out to the individual residents that are making improvements in their home. And it starts in the home. And oftentimes, folks come to our programs because we have rebates and financing that help them to make those improvements in their home. But over the years, we have started to see folks coming to us because they want to make it even more efficient. They want to go to the highest level of efficiency. They want to make that impact on reducing their carbon footprint and doing everything they can in their home. Not just that one-off project, but really looking at the entire home as a system and what they can do there. Not just replacing the air conditioner or the heating system. It's like, how can I do this so that I can reduce my utility bills, maybe put solar on. So we encourage everybody to really look at their house and do those efficiency projects first, because you know the cheapest, cleanest energy that we can save is the energy we do not use. So if you look at the efficiency in your home, before you do solar, you might have a smaller solar system that you have to put on. You have that increase in energy efficiency, reduced utility bills. That helps you pay for those systems that you're going to put on. We also have rebates for electric vehicle charging stations. So you want to look at everything that you're doing in the house and how you're impacting that. And not just, oh, I want to put in the charging station, but what can I do first before I put that charging station in so that I can reduce my utility bill, and really look at everything in my house that's using that system. So right now, we have the Home Energy Checkup and Counseling Program. It started as a program for low income or income eligible customers. We've expanded that to be a statewide program so that everybody in Delaware can participate in that, and it's free to everybody who wants to participate, and you can get up to $240 worth of direct install measures, and you can start saving energy today. So we have some brochures on the table, but we'll talk more during the conversation about what we can do in our communities and what we can do in our home.
Those are some great examples. I was going to talk a little bit and kind of build off of some of the themes expressed in the last panel in regard to our extreme events, and say that I think we need, at an individual level, individual household, at a local community level like an HOA, or at the municipal county level, I think we need to build more self-sufficiency into our plans and preparedness for these extreme events. I feel often that even though Delaware's been fortunate not to have too many direct hits, it doesn't take a direct hit for us to feel the impacts. As that example of Northeast Wilmington showed with the remnants of Hurricane Ida, as the example of the severe flooding we had in this area from Hurricane Sandy, which tracked north of us, was supposed to go toward Lewis, if I recall. It doesn't take a direct hit. But I think the seeds are in place. I think the ingredients are in place for a disaster or an impactful event for our region. And I'm saying that because we've had a lot of population growth in Delaware, and where is a lot of that growth being concentrated? Along the coast. And where along the coast? Inside the floodplain. In areas that have higher exposure to flooding and the effects of storm surge and wind and things like that. We have the population that is moving to this area and other parts of the state. A lot of them are older adults, and older adults can be highly vulnerable to these impacts from storms. We've seen there's lots of research out there that shows they bear a disproportionate impact. And it doesn't matter what their income level, their race is, age is a factor. And you think about that just in terms of if they're no longer in the workforce, just being able to recover can be so much harder because, they're not in the workforce. And then I think, of our land use practices in the state, which is, kind of concentrating development in level 1 spending areas, right? Which is, in this region, the coast. Well, there's a lot of methodology to that makes sense. You want to concentrate development where there's infrastructure, use mixed-use properties and density. But I also think about that some of the areas here in this coastal region has our very important, vital green infrastructure. Our wetlands, our trees. Our waterways. These are areas that are providing many services to us, including flood protection and improving the overall resilience of the area. So I do sometimes question whether level 1 spending is really appropriate to focus on, given that we are going to see more heavy rainfall events, more intensification of storms that maybe stall offshore, over the state and dump a lot of rain, tornadoes. So I just tend to question whether, we would want to concentrate as many individuals along some of these vulnerable areas. So that gets me to that I think that we need to focus more on self-sufficiency, because I have tremendous praise and regard for our Delaware Emergency Management Agency, DEMA. I work with them pretty frequently, but they're an organization of maybe 40 people for the whole state. And they're dealing not just with storm hazards, but they're dealing with avian flu, and they're dealing with cybersecurity and hazmats. And now that we see maybe, a change in the prioritization at the federal level with regard to emergency management, a lot of that onus is going to be on the state and local levels. And I think that means more emergency operations planning, thinking about where are your most vulnerable citizens and what are contingencies in place. And as we develop our land use practices, promoting interconnectivity between developments so that we have alternative routes when our evacuation routes flood. Critically important. So those are a couple of the, and I'll be happy to expand on that some more.
Yeah, no, well, thank you so much for that. And the next question that I really had was, what could folks do specifically around, disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness, and flooding? We are the lowest lying state. So what could folks do really around preparing for that? Is it, have a plan in place? Is it a kit? What could we do? Because by the time the flood is there, it's often too late. So what could we do right now to prepare for that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking that. It starts with knowing your risk, first off. And I do a lot of outreach throughout the state, and by and large, a lot of folks, they don't think about it too often. But if you're already in a residence, thinking about what is your elevation. That's in a low-lying state like Delaware, that's critically important, is knowing your elevation, knowing your proximity to waterways, water sources, including tidal sources. Looking at drainage patterns in your neighborhood. Are properties draining toward you or away from you? That makes a lot of sense to evaluate. Looking at drainage ditches, swales, stormwater drains, are they clogged? Are they being maintained? Those are the kinds of things that could contribute, for example, to flood risk. And home buyers, largely will come and they don't often ask all the right questions, but it's getting better. But I think that there's a criticality in helping to educate home buyers that are coming to the area and working with realtors and others that work with them to help them ask the right questions and be smart consumers. Once you know your risks, then it's a matter of assessing your own personal situation. We go through different phases in our lives. So, if you're a 40-year-old with a family, with kids, you're going to have different considerations than, a 55-year-old who's caring for an elderly parent or a 75-year-old who's retired. So thinking about your stage in life and are you comfortable evacuating on short notice? Can you be self-sufficient if you need to shelter in place for 3 to 5 days on your own? If there's suddenly a sudden emergency and you need to leave, are you comfortable driving at night? Do you have pets? So developing contingency plans and building that into a plan that you share with your relatives or neighbors, and forging a support network so maybe you have some assistance if you need it.
Yeah, Suzanne and Lisa, is there anything you would like to add to that question?
I can maybe add and almost serve as a bridge between the first question and this one. I'm really happy you talked about stormwater, not because I identify myself as a stormwater nerd, but as part of our Bays to Backyards program, there's many categories that communities can choose from this menu. And under each category, there's a number of activities. And as one of the partners with Sea Grant, one of the categories is very much stormwater and flooding management. Like you mentioned, maintaining your swales or implementing a number of stormwater best management practices and really taking a look at the drainage in your communities. It's critical. So we need to be aware of this locally impact that we have. And our program does just that and provides some of those resources where communities feel like they have kind of a one-stop shop, if you will, through a catalog that looks at all of those resources. And it's pulling so much wonderful information that we have, and kudos to so many institutions around our state that provide such a wealth and breadth and depth of information. So I think that's really 100% critical. As a home buyer, when I was looking around, I think I annoyed my husband because I turned away from a number of homes just because of I was looking at the drainage. So it's very critical, absolutely.
So as we look at homes, whether we're buying an existing home or we're building new construction, we should look at the opportunities that are there to either build a home that's going to sustain some of these weather events that we may experience in the future, or if we're looking at an existing home, what opportunities are out there through some programs maybe that we have at Energize Delaware to air seal that home, add some insulation, so should you lose power, that you may not be as hot or as cold if you've air sealed that house or added that insulation to make it more energy efficient. The other thing to think about is what is the impact on the grid? You know, how much energy is going to be needed as we recover from some of these storms and some of these impacts. You know, the less impact that we have as we all turn those powers back on and think about how we do that. You know, can we power our phones through a solar panel or something else, or, you know, wait and see when we can, you know, recharge our EV, you know, when we're going to turn that back on. Oftentimes people think if they install solar, they're going to be in good shape if they lose power. Unfortunately, if you're connected to the grid, you're not going to have that power because there's a safety issue with that power going back into the grid and turning on. So think about those things. And do you have the ability to switch something off or turn something on that solar as you're installing that system that will get you through one of these disaster events? There are also opportunities, unfortunately, if we have to rebuild after that we want to take a look at what we can do to rebuild in the most efficient manner and put in those extra efficiency systems and build so that we're either EV ready or able to take on those additional battery storage systems that may be coming in the future. So we want to look at sometimes if we have a disaster, what are the opportunities that we can take to make our home or our community more resilient as we rebuild and move forward?
Thank you all. That was great. One question that I also had was, what are some ways that folks could practice climate resiliency within some of these smaller communities? Like you mentioned, the HOA, you know, your neighborhood association, your book club, Rotary Club. You know, what are some ways that people could do that within these communities that they have that may not be as big as a city, but are, you know, bigger than just you and your partner and your family in your household?
Yeah. I really want to stress the value of support networks, that, you know, this could be at the HOA level, it could be, you know, at a municipal level, cross-boundary area. It's actually worth mentioning that 3/4 of the population in Sussex, and I think also in Newcastle County, are outside of incorporated areas. So, and then I think it's about 2/3 in Kent. So we have a lot of individuals that are living outside of incorporated areas, and the counties may or may not be up to the task to really know who's going to need extra assistance and how to, you know, deal with emergencies and get them to safety. So support networks, we have community emergency response teams, which is a program that DEMA runs in partnership with the counties. We have a number of CERT teams that have been sprouting up in our area, and they're really fabulous. They're there to not be a first responder, but think of them as sort of like a second responder that can kind of supplement some of the efforts or help a neighborhood until the first responders can arrive. And they have some special training that goes with that. There's also groups that exist, like our Village Volunteer Network. There's an active hub in South Bethany area. There's one in the Lewis area that keeps tabs on older adults, drives them to, you know, their different appointments, but could also be a resource for them during times of emergencies. And then, you know, during COVID, we had a fabulous ad hoc network sprout up called Cape. It was CCC for COVID back then. It's called Cape Community Coalition now, CCC. And it was a network of, you know, the library, farmers market, the school district, BB Healthcare, Sea Grant, business owners, individual volunteers, and then eventually became state agencies and local officials. And we all banded together to figure out who had the most needs in the area and how could we just leverage our resources a little more effectively to fill some of those needs, because we were seeing signs of food insecurity, for example, or people having trouble accessing the vaccination sites, particularly when they had those big, large-scale vaccination events at the kind of the height of the COVID pandemic. And what it taught me was how effective an ad hoc network can be just by communicating with each other, information sharing, and leveraging those resources and amplifying the needs. I think that forging those kinds of supports can be wholly effective for climate resilience and disasters. And think of it as a form of social infrastructure. We spend so much time thinking about our physical infrastructure and how to adapt that, which is critically important. But I think we also need to build that social capital within our communities so that there's another layer of support.
So I just wanted to build on that too, that we found that when we went out into communities, oftentimes if we partnered with the schools through our Pathways to Green Schools program and talked with the teachers and the PTAs and got that message out about our programs and what folks can do at home, and taking it to the school children really worked. The other thing that was really effective was we partnered with our Faith Efficiencies program and got into the faith communities throughout the state. You know, oftentimes folks have conversations, you know, with their faith communities and they feel more comfortable there. They have a trust factor about what you're talking about and what you're bringing to the table. So we would bring our workshops to those faith communities, to the schools, to other organizations. We've also had the HOA meetings and done specific workshops, you know, in those groups. So getting out to the community and meeting people where they are really makes a difference and gets the dialogue going and has folks more engaged and more apt to act and participate in the program. Whereas if we just walked up and knocked on the door, someone's not going to really want to hear from us. You know, folks, you know, want to have those conversations in an atmosphere where they're comfortable talking about those things. So those partnerships really make a difference.
100%. I love the discussion of kind of this social capital, right? There are so many things that we can learn from one another and not just the experts. Very much like you mentioned, homeowners in this area, whether it's an HOA, POA, or not. We can learn from one another and not continuously recreate the wheel. So when we are trying to focus on enhancing the resilience of our communities, whether it's something where you want to enhance open space, right? Or, hey, you're really passionate about pollinators and putting in, pollinator meadows or vegetated filter strips, really looking at, okay, capture and treating stormwater. What works in one community may or may not work in another. It's site specific. But for a program where we can really harness the power of our knowledge and our experience, that's magic. So I think with this program that we're working on with our partners, which I do want to name before I forget, we envision that as an opportunity for communities to talk with one another. There's so many HOAs in this area and ever growing. And if communities choose as part of the program to mentor others, they get credit for it. So now we're trying to bring folks into the fold and learn from one another. And the beautiful vision that we have is to offer a forum, an annual forum where all participating communities come together and share lessons learned, help celebrate and uplift one another, bring in experts to address hot topics that they need to focus on or curious. So it really takes a collective on so many different levels, and it really is about the capital on a social level there. I think it's fundamental. And you mentioned, what can folks practice, right, in their communities. Again, going back to this program, it really offers that suite, that menu. It's a one-stop shop, really, of, hey, these are the many priority areas. Look and see what resonates in your community. Are you focused on something that is a challenge currently or a hope? Maybe it's a mix. And we serve as essentially your mentors, right? We're there to cheer you on and provide this guidance, all the while you are really diving in as a community and working together. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Lisa, building off on that, what are some things, and this is a question for everybody, but what are some things that people individually, like in their own household, could do practically to practice climate resiliency right now?
Speaking from personal experience, I'm very much zeroing in on how can I enhance native plants in on my property. That's number one. I'm very lucky to have fully mature trees, and they provide such a wealth of benefits from a climate perspective to a flooding perspective, wildlife habitat, and everything in between. So I really think if you can look at what is your property currently and what can it be, and really identify these lofty goals, but then really set the tone for manageable steps to get there, right? We as humans, we get really excited about these fantastic advancements, but if it's too lofty, we sometimes shy away from it. There's a reason why our New Year's resolutions don't always work out, personally speaking. But we really have to look at what is manageable and celebrate those wins as we go. If you want to even dive deeper, the individual level is we need to do a self-check, right? So these are really challenging, overwhelming issues that we're looking at. And if we don't do that self-check on how we are processing that, that can be a barrier for action right there, right? So if there is a sense of helplessness or, gosh, even hopelessness, what I love about the program that we're doing, as well as just in general the center and our partners do, we're really working to take that rather uncomfortable feeling and shift it into purpose, right? So this is the opportunity that we have right here. And there's so much pride and care for these resources that offer so much for us. If we can tap into that, we are not just building a more resilient future for ourselves and our loved ones or our neighbors or the future generation, but the very plants, fish, and wildlife that we share this home with. We call this place home. So I think as part of that, we do need to address the emotional side of things because it's very real.
So I would suggest everybody, look at their home and see what kind of things they can do around the house. Engage in our home energy checkup and counseling program. It's the free audit. You can also move forward with the regular home energy assessment, and you can have a professional come in and take a look at your home. You may be having comfort issues, in one room of your house, and they can address it. And then you can make a prioritized list of what you want to do to move forward. But as we make these improvements in our home, and we have rebates, we have financing, to do energy efficiency, to do solar, and it's not just in your home. It's also, you can do it in your houses of worship. We have programs for nonprofits. We have programs for businesses. We try and partner with other organizations to fill the gaps and bring in funding to help everybody across the board, across Delaware. We have programs for farms. We have programs for electric vehicle infrastructure. We've partnered with state agencies to bring electric vehicles to the state fleet to reduce the impact on the taxes that we're doing. All this energy efficiency work and renewable energy that we're doing also reduces the amount of power that we need on our grid, that all the emissions that we're saving. So, the great thing about doing energy efficiency and reducing those utility costs, all at the same time, you're reducing your impact on our climate. You're making your home and your community more resilient. You're improving the air quality. We're helping to achieve those goals that Susan Love talked about for climate change and net zero for the state policies. So all of these things that you're doing, you can do them at the community level, you can do them at the business level, you can do them right in your home. And there are little things that you can do every day just by looking around the house, like, Do you really need your cell phone charger sitting in the wall plugged in and your phone's not attached to it? Do you need your coffee pot plugged in every day? There's a lot of phantom energy use on all this electronic equipment that has made our lives so convenient, that is consuming energy in our home that we just don't even think about. So take a look around your house, and it's just that little thing you can do, and it's not going to cost you anything. We also have an online marketplace where you can purchase, LED light bulbs, water-saving shower heads. Some of these things you might get for free if you participate in our programs. So take a look at our website, and hopefully you can make your home more energy efficient, all at the same time improving our climate and our resiliency for our wonderful state.
I would just add to that, maybe we ought to stop building such big homes. That's the trend, but maximum lot coverage. We need to reduce that because we need to reduce the amount of impervious surface we have on our lots to give the rain somewhere to go. So it's not going off into a storm drain and then channeled out to the waterway. We need it to replenish our aquifers and to be absorbed into the ground so that it's not flooding somebody else. To that end, invest in flood insurance. I hear from a lot of homeowners who have paid off their mortgage and they drop their insurance. Well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do, because now you have all this equity built into your house and you've just underinsured it. Flood insurance isn't the end-all be-all. It's not going to necessarily cover, covers up to about $220,000 or so, give or take, of a home. So it's, for these prices in this area, that's not everything, but it's something, and you're going to want it if there's an event. So I would start with looking at the impervious surfaces on a lot and really seeing what you can do to reduce that and invest in your green spaces.
Yeah, and with a lot of folks here, and I'm sure what would you say to Delawareans who may be concerned about rising sea level? We're right here by the beach. You see maybe every summer they see the level rise a little bit, or they see more floods come in, or hotter summers. What would you all say to concerned Delawareans about climate change? And Lisa, you mentioned check-ins, or what are some personal kind of tips that you would suggest? Like, is it journaling? Is it like saying instead of just doom scrolling about what's going on and stuff? Like, what are some personal things that people could do if they are concerned about climate change in the first state?
I think we have to change our perspective and figure out ways to live more with water. We spend a lot of time trying to keep water out, which is a fair approach. You have to do that dry flood proofing, where needed. But I think we may also have to, expect that for some of these coastal towns anyway, that to really survive and thrive, it's going to be trying to figure out how to design with water in mind. Maybe there's wet zones in the community that are allowed to flood, and that there's contingencies that are put in place so that people are getting, accessing those areas, maybe by boat, maybe by, I don't know. But we have to think a little more innovatively about that.
Jumping off of that, working with nature, not against it. There are so many different best practices out there to address so many issues. So for example, flooding, right? Nature-based solutions, innovation that mimics and learns from nature. So rather than hard armoring your waterfront property, right? We can look at alternative solutions that utilize materials that are from nature. So a living shoreline is a perfect example. So there's a reason why when you look at comparisons of the damage done by hurricanes in areas with bulkheads versus living shorelines, there is definitely a difference there. And nature knows best in so many ways. So I think that's part of it too. Like your example of looking in your community and can you deem areas as part of this wet zone, like you mentioned. How can we, again, work with nature, bring in some plants that are really great at absorbing, so filtering maybe pollutants that are being transported by all the stormwater that's rolling across our properties. So that's just one example. And again, going back to those self-checks, action has this beautiful way about it to calm the system. So we do have a purpose. We can do some sort of change in the face of something that seems just so overwhelming and out of our grasp. Because again, collectively, if we were all to do something, whether it's perfect or not, we're still, again, uplifting the system. We have to look at it as a whole body system, right? If you're stressed, you're more likely to catch a cold, right? So we need to look at it as the sum of all the parts. So I think that's a wonderful way that you can bring that in.
So one of the strategic plans or strategic initiatives of Energize Delaware is to look at natural climate solutions on how we can reduce the impact of carbon. So it's one of the things that we're very interested in doing more of, and maybe partnering with, you know, some of our other agencies that are also have this the same importance for these, you know, native species, you know, to plant in our backyards, in our communities, in our open spaces. Carbon sequestration, you know, absorbing that carbon from the atmosphere, you know, from the plants that we plant. We can have buffers, you know, in farmlands that help sequester this carbon. You know, they will help with the stormwater and the mitigation and the resiliency of the water, but they will also take that carbon out of the air and help with the resiliency that we're trying to meet there. So having native plants, doing more plantings. One of the things that I kind of cringe when I hear folks saying, well, I'm going to cut down that tree so I can put solar panels on my house because they'll be shaded if I don't cut down the tree. I'm like, can we just look at a different option of where those solar panels might go? Because that tree is also doing a lot of good for our community and for our environment. So we want to really think about the things that we're doing around our home. And sometimes, you know, we have unintended consequences when we move forward. So looking at everything as a holistic approach and what is the best thing for us to do. Maybe solar doesn't work on every property, but we can do something else there. So if we have a nice property that has a lot of trees, we're absorbing that carbon. So feel good about that and be proud of that. And don't think that you're not doing something because your neighbor put solar up, but you can't. So I think it's just important to understand, you know, what we're doing personally in our own homes and in our communities, and be proud of that and have that conversation that we said everything doesn't work everywhere. And so let's look at what works for the properties that we have or the communities that we're in and take advantage of those situations.
Jose Ignacio, if I could add just something else I forgot, but it's really exciting, I think, is that Delaware Sea Grant is partnering with a national nonprofit to bring flood vision to Delaware. This is a tool that creates photorealistic imagery of streetscapes, along with first floor elevation data, married with projections of our rising tides and different storms. To depict what the water levels could be at City Hall or at a fire station or at your library or at, you know, your commercial center. And we're not able to bring it to every quadrant of Delaware, but we're bringing it to a lot of places. And the idea is to provide those visualizations to help the public, you know, they'll hear about, right, our rising tides, and then they, you know, that seems far off. Maybe, you know, maybe they haven't, you know, experienced nuisance flooding on their block yet. But for those individuals, this will give them an opportunity to kind of understand, you know, what conditions we might be looking at in the future. And then for our municipal leaders and county leaders or our businesses, they can take that information and help to plan, you know, adaptation and mitigation measures. So look for that Flood Rover Mobile, which is outfitted with special technology, will be coming around in just a couple of weeks, and we look to have some of this imagery available this summer.
That's very cool, very cool. And taking a little bit of a step back, What can folks do to get involved in like the public processes of locally with your city council, your town council, in the state, in the county? What can folks do to kind of get involved, make a change in a term that's a little bit higher than just your household or your neighborhood?
I'll start. I definitely encourage folks to check out our website, inlandbays.org, for a number of activities that we're doing, and really reach out to your elected officials and really express the need for more robust planning and policies that really protect our resilience. So, there's that side of things. Certainly writing letters to the editor on pieces that you're most interested in or topics. We do have a Citizens Advisory Committee, or CAC, where they meet quarterly, and they are a committee that their sole responsibility is to hear voices of the community and bring these concerns related to the inland bays and the surrounding watershed to our board of directors. So some really actively work to write resolutions for action, whether it's in the heart of our center or at, let's say, the county level, for example. They are also very hard at work doing a number of other efforts. We have a member of CAC here with us today, so please give her a wave at our outreach booth out in the hall. But I think that there's opportunities here that you can really voice what is a concern of yours, and again, take those steps on an action level. This is another opportunity for building that network and feeling like a collective energy, because that certainly drives this lasting momentum, right? So it's not just these one-off programs that we as institutions want to offer, or resources. I don't want it to just sit on a shelf and never be looked at. So how can you get on the ground and really apply that in whatever capacity that you have? Again, there's so many levels here. So when you're a part of something like that, it's fantastic. I think I would start there and end there.
Well, Sea Grant's not an advocacy organization, but I would say, so I think Lisa covered it really well, but I believe in the power of stories. And the more that we can tell our stories, our particular experiences with a tornado or wind damage or flooding, or just seeing the tide come up high, or erosion, those kinds of things, impacts. Maybe you couldn't get to your doctor's appointment on that particular day, or the bus can't get down the street to pick up the kids to school. Those kinds of stories, I think, are very important to document and to share, particularly with legislators, so that they see that the impacts are already being felt. And I think we just need to air that more.
So I would just say to get involved with those organizations as your communities are growing and as they're building. We have resources at Energize Delaware, either for technical assistance or for financing or grants. If you're building new facilities, make them as most energy efficient as possible, whether it's a business or whether it's a local government facility or whether it's a school or something else. We have some resources to really make sure that we build the most efficient buildings that we can and build them in a manner that is going to be resilient for that community. Also, let them know that we have resources available there. We're also very willing to come out and have conversations, with your local government agencies, with your communities. We can help, we have grants for libraries and stuff that we can do. And, some of these organizations are going to be maybe your storm shelters, if we have an impact. So we want to make sure that the resources are there in those local facilities, that if they have to support some of the folks from the community for a short period of time as a shelter or as a place to go and a safe haven, somewhere where they can go and charge their cell phones, we could put solar, there, or battery backup storage, or some sort of other resiliency measures in place, so that folks have a place to go, and then they can learn about what opportunities are there while they're there and be safe at the same time.
Yeah, Thank you all. I just want to thank you all for your amazing, really engaging panel. I really learned a lot, and I hope all you did too. And I just wanted to leave ample time for questions and for answers and stuff. But yeah, we'll just open it up to questions now.
Please.
Hi, my name is Linda Gould, and one thing that is almost always absent in this discussion, and yet is relevant at every single level, is death. I'm here representing the death care industry, or actually questioning how we think about death and how it is very often the way we bury our people is not sustainable. Here in Delaware, like in the last panel, for example, they were talking about farmland. And there's a thing called a conservation cemetery that right here, Delaware, in this area, or in Kent County, has the possibility of finding a new way, like providing a new way, a sustainable way to bury our dead. The current way we do it, I know this is such a downer. Usually people are like, oh, why is she talking about death? We're here to talk about life and how we can continue. And that's true, but as you know, it impacts every single thing that we have talked about today in the previous panel, as well as what you guys have talked about. I'm so sorry, Danielle, no, I'm so sorry, it's Lisa talked about nature. Well, a conservation cemetery takes farmland or parking lots or land that has that is abandoned and turns it into green spaces. The mayor talks about, well, all of us are talking about flooding. Well, what do you think happens to cemeteries when a community floods? That's a pretty scary thing to think about. And yet, our modern practices try to make people be buried and kind of, well, in the casket, they last for 100 years or so. And yet, a natural burial speeds up that process. So, I mean, I'm here, of course, to talk about natural burials, but I think that in all of the conversations that we have today, and I'm curious if anyone there has ever thought about the dying process and how we bury people, how we embalm people. You know, because this is your expertise, but I would ask all of us to think about that. And if you are involved in any way, if you have land, if you're interested in a natural burial, talk to a funeral home, because right now in Delaware, there is no place where someone who wants an alternative burial can have it, and it is consumer driven. In the West Coast, there are many places. In South Carolina, there are places. In Tennessee, it's not just a West Coast thing. And yet, here we are kind of at the cusp of it on the East Coast, and Delaware could actually be a perfect place to have an alternative and to start us rethinking how we are buried. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm curious if anyone here has ever thought about that.
I'll take that one. On a personal level, actually, it's funny. My husband and I, we always talk about who's going to turn into the tree and who is going to provide the substrate for corals. So there are programs out there. So yes, I personally thought about that. I did not know about the possibilities in our state here, and I absolutely think that's exciting. Big picture, yeah, our land use and the changes to the land use on all different levels need to be a factor, 100%. You know, I'm here talking about a very specific program working with residential communities, but yes, we are changing the landscape. So again, going back to that systems approach, and I hope with this type of opportunity, they would think native plants the whole way. But absolutely, in a former life, in a previous position of mine, working in the stormwater field, you know, one of the actions that a partner in a consortium was taking was looking at water quality and connecting it upstream to a cemetery. Yeah, there's chemicals in the process there. So we really need to think about it. And in our area that is very much sandy soils that are more pervious, so things are infiltrating more, gosh, I mean, that's something to consider, what's getting into our groundwater supplies. Is the center looking at that specifically with cemeteries? No. But I'm excited to hear more about it. I'm looking at my colleagues and we're all like, ooh. So I appreciate you, Linda, for bringing that up. And yes, it's talking about life and resiliency moving forward, but it's a full circle. So I appreciate that.
Hi, good morning. My name is Robbie Anstead. I'm coming with the Claymont Coalition for Environmental Justice. I really appreciated Danielle's comments and point about unincorporated communities and the flood vision mapping work that you mentioned. I came down from Claymont today where we're facing legacy contamination, active rezoning, and limited access to tools that could help us prepare. Without a formal local government, it's often unclear how or when communities like ours get to plug in to programs like this. And so my question is, how are communities chosen for engagement in these resilience efforts? And how do we make sure that the structurally under-resourced ones don't get left out just because they often don't have channels or a municipal title? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of components really to an answer to that. I mean, the two that come to mind is I think that our practitioner community is trying to be more mindful of the fact that there's some communities that bear disproportionate impacts and have a less representation, and we need to do a better job of serving them and bringing them to the table, involving them directly in discussions and the planning. For groups, you know, and I'm a real passionate person about capacity building, and I think of our state, you know, if you take out Wilmington and about 9 or 10 other towns, we're really a state of small towns and rural areas, and that means we have communities that don't have a lot of government staff and infrastructure and representation. So I believe strongly in doing what you can to get involved in networks. And I'm going to make a plug for RASCL, the Resilient and Sustainable Communities League. RASCL is a statewide network of our state agencies, nonprofits, and university groups like Sea Grant. And we provide forums and opportunities to really cultivate partnerships. So a lot of networking opportunities, a lot of information sharing, and technical assistance. We have a project guidance group where we provide free informal advice from different experts that, depending on your topic, will get on a Zoom with you and offer some free consultation advice on how to get started on a project or how to, work your way through the system and try to see where you can get some more help. There's probably a lot more I could say, but those are the two that come to mind right now.
Yeah, I echo the networks and reaching out to all communities. At the center a number of years ago, we worked on a cumulative impact study and really looking at the stressors across the board that individuals are facing. Certainly being a national estuary program and focusing on the inland bays watershed, we wanted to really look at the area as a whole in our focus area, but better understanding what communities are facing across the board, whether it's, yes, the environmental stressors, maybe hot spots for flooding, but also what's the closest grocery store or doctors, right? These are real challenges every day. I'm a mother. I want to focus on that, right? So we need to understand what individuals are facing. So that gave us a better understanding. So then we can look at what can we do, where does it make sense with our work, but also maybe bringing new groups into the fold that we haven't maybe partnered with before. I'll do a shameless plug too. So next week we are holding a free open house as part of a Coast Forward Summit. There is information on our table out there where we are welcoming experts across the board to really listen and learn and focus on resiliency for our region. But also we very much welcome the community, the public, to come and join us and listen and learn together, right? It's a two-way street. So we'll also, after some roundtable discussions with specific facilitated questions, we'll have that open house where we will have a number of exhibitors joining us to really connect with the communities. This will be in Georgetown. So very much please come out May 1st. It's a Thursday. But big picture, the center, yes, we of course want to look at the communities, and historically we've been looking towards the main areas close to the bays and the oceans, but if you turn around and look at the rest of our watershed that's more inland, there's a lot of focus areas there that we need to work on. So there's a number of projects that we're doing that addresses those very things. So I really appreciate that question, and yeah, it's going to take everybody.
So I will just say at Energize Delaware, we're a statewide organization, and we don't prioritize on, incorporated communities. So we are here to help everyone across the state, whether you're a nonprofit, a government, a business, a residential customer. So reach out to us if there are projects that you have in mind that you're interested in energy efficiency or renewables or technical assistance. We have resources that are out there for everyone, and we do classify ourselves as a one-stop shop. So we don't just work in designated areas, and what we like to do in Delaware or Energize Delaware is to fill the gaps where there's a need, so we don't like to duplicate services that are out there from another organization. So we try to partner and leverage across the board so that we can bring additional resources to help move projects forward.
Great. I think that's all the time that we have for questions, but we'll all be around. I believe we have like a happy hour and there's going to be breaks and stuff. So if you wanted to ask a question, feel free to come up to us, or I won't speak for you all. I don't know how much I can answer. But we'll all be around for answers.